this episode, we look at performance-based question, PBQ, strategy, and how to turn exam objectives into practical scenario decisions. A PBQ is different from a normal multiple-choice question because it asks you to do something with what you know. You may need to choose controls, match evidence to events, interpret logs, arrange steps, review a diagram, identify a misconfiguration, or decide which security action fits a situation. That can feel intimidating at first because the screen may contain more information than you expected. The way through is to slow down and identify 3 things before you start clicking or choosing anything. You want to know the task, the environment, and the security goal. When those 3 pieces are clear, the scenario becomes less like a puzzle and more like a decision you can reason through. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at Cyber.Me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The task is what the question is actually asking you to do. This sounds obvious, but it is where many people lose points because they start solving the wrong problem. A scenario may include logs, users, servers, cloud settings, firewall rules, or incident details. But the task may only ask you to identify the first action, choose the best control, place items in the correct order, or select the misconfigured setting. You should train yourself to read the instruction carefully before you focus on the details. If the task says to minimize downtime, that points you toward availability. If it says to prevent unauthorized access, that points you toward identity, permissions, and authentication. If it says to preserve evidence, that points you toward incident response discipline. The task tells you what kind of answer the exam wants. The environment is the setting where the task takes place. A security decision in a small office, a cloud platform, a data center, a remote work situation, or an incident response process may look different even when the same general topic is involved. You need to notice what systems are present, what data is involved, who the users are, and what constraints appear in the scenario. If the environment mentions cloud storage exposed to the internet, your mind should move toward access permissions, public sharing, encryption, logging, and data exposure. If the environment mentions remote employees, you may think about secure access, device posture, virtual private network, VPN, use, phishing, and endpoint controls. If the environment mentions a production network, you should be careful with actions that could interrupt service. The environment shapes which answer is safe and realistic. The security goal is the reason the action matters. Most PBQ scenarios connect to confidentiality, integrity, availability, accountability, privacy, compliance, or risk reduction. Confidentiality means information is protected from people who should not see it. Integrity means information and systems remain accurate and trustworthy. Availability means systems and data are ready when needed. Accountability means actions can be traced to the right user, process, or system. When you find the goal, you can ignore options that may sound technical but do not solve the actual problem. For example, encryption may help confidentiality, but it does not automatically prove who accessed a file. Backups may help availability, but they do not prevent an attacker from logging in with stolen credentials. A good answer matches the goal instead of merely sounding like a strong security word. Identity and access management, IAM, scenarios are common because access decisions appear everywhere in security. A PBQ might show users, groups, roles, privileges, and resources, then ask you to choose the safest access design. Start by asking who needs access, what they need to do, and what they should not be able to do. Least privilege is usually the guiding idea. A user who only needs to read reports should not have administrative permissions. A contractor who works for 30 days should not receive permanent access without review. A privileged administrator should usually have stronger protection than a normal user. Multi-factor authentication, MFA, role design, group membership, access reviews, and separation of duties can all appear in these scenarios. Your job is to connect the access choice to the business need and the risk. In an IAM PBQ, be careful not to overgrant access just because it makes the task easier. The exam often rewards the answer that gives enough access to do the job without giving extra power. If a scenario shows a user moving from one department to another, think about removing old access as well as adding new access. If it shows a shared account, think about accountability and the difficulty of knowing who performed an action. If it shows repeated failed logins or impossible travel, think about account compromise, password reset, MFA prompts, and session review. If it shows privileged access being requested, think about approval, logging, and time limits. These questions are not only asking whether you know the acronym, they are asking whether you can protect identity as a control point. Incident response (PBQ) scenarios often ask you to choose an action under pressure. The scenario may show a suspected malware infection, a compromised account, unusual network traffic, data exposure, or a suspicious alert. You should resist the urge to jump straight to wiping systems or shutting everything down unless the scenario clearly calls for that. Incident response usually follows a disciplined flow that includes preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned. The exact question may ask for the next best step, not the final solution. If the incident is still uncertain, identification and evidence collection may come before drastic action. If the threat is active and spreading, containment may come first. If systems are already clean and restored, recovery and monitoring may matter more. The correct answer depends on the current stage of the incident. Evidence handling matters in incident response scenarios because careless action can destroy the very information needed to understand what happened. If a PBQ mentions legal review, insider activity, law enforcement, or possible data theft, think about preserving logs, documenting actions, maintaining chain of custody, and avoiding unnecessary changes to affected systems. Chain of custody means the record of who handled evidence, when they handled it, and what happened to it. You may not need to perform forensic work on the exam, but you should recognize when evidence preservation is the priority. A system can sometimes be restored quickly, but if you erase critical logs before anyone reviews them, you may lose the ability to determine scope and cause. A good incident response answer balances urgency with control. Fast action is useful only when it does not make the situation worse. Log scenarios test whether you can turn raw events into a security decision. A PBQ may show login attempts, firewall entries, endpoint alerts, cloud audit events, domain name system, DNS, queries, or application logs. Start by identifying what normal would look like. Then look for patterns that do not fit. Repeated failed logins followed by a success may suggest password guessing. A login from two distant locations in a short time may suggest impossible travel. A user account accessing unusual data at an unusual hour may suggest compromised credentials or insider misuse. A sudden spike in denied firewall traffic may suggest scanning or an attempted attack. Do not try to memorize every possible log format. Focus on source, destination, time, user, action, result, and whether the event supports the security goal in the question. Cloud misconfiguration scenarios often focus on shared responsibility, access, exposure, and data protection. A PBQ may describe a storage bucket, cloud database, identity role, security group, public endpoint, or logging setting. First, identify what is exposed and who can reach it. If sensitive data is publicly accessible, the likely issue is not that the cloud exists. The issue is the access configuration. You may need to restrict public access, apply least privilege, enable encryption, require stronger authentication, review identity roles, or turn on logging. Shared responsibility means the cloud provider protects certain underlying services, while the customer remains responsible for how resources, identities, data, and permissions are configured. In these scenarios, avoid answers that blame the provider when the customer clearly misconfigured access. The exam wants you to recognize the customer side of cloud security decisions. Firewall rule scenarios are about controlled traffic, not just blocking everything. A PBQ may show source addresses, destination addresses, ports, protocols, rule order, and allow or deny actions. Start by identifying what traffic should be allowed for the business function. Then identify what should be blocked because it is unnecessary or risky. Rule order matters because firewalls often evaluate rules from top to bottom until a match is found. A broad allow rule above a narrow deny rule may accidentally permit traffic the organization meant to block. A broad deny rule above a needed allow rule may break a service. Think about least privilege for network traffic. Allow only the required source, destination, protocol, and service when the scenario gives enough detail. A clean firewall answer supports the needed connection while reducing unnecessary exposure. Data protection scenarios ask you to match the control to the data state and risk. Data at rest is stored data, such as files, databases, backups, and drives. Data in transit is moving across a network. Data in use is being processed by an application or user. Encryption can protect stored or transmitted data, but the specific control depends on the situation. Transport layer security, TLS, protects data in transit. Full disk encryption can protect a lost laptop. Database encryption can protect stored records. Tokenization can reduce exposure by replacing sensitive values with tokens. Data loss prevention, DLP, can help detect or block sensitive data leaving approved channels. Classification tells you how sensitive the data is so the right handling rules can be applied. In a PBQ, ask what data exists, where it is, and what harm must be prevented. Some PBQ answers are wrong because they solve a different problem than the one presented. A question about preventing data exposure may include an option about improving availability, and that option may sound good, but still miss the goal. A question about preserving evidence may include an option about rebuilding a system, which might be useful later, but not first. A question about least privilege may include an option that grants broad administrative access because it would avoid support calls. You should also watch for extreme answers. Always allow everything and block everything are rarely correct unless the scenario clearly supports them. The best answer often balances security with the business need. Security decisions should reduce risk while still allowing the intended work to happen. The scenario usually gives you enough clues to find that balance if you slow down. Time management matters because PBQs can take longer than normal questions. A useful approach is to make a first pass through the task, identify what the scenario wants, and handle the parts you can solve confidently. If one part is confusing, do not let it consume all your time. Mark what you can, move forward, and return if the exam allows it. You can often earn partial credit when a PBQ has multiple choices or placements, so do not abandon the entire item just because one detail is unclear. Read labels carefully, especially usernames, groups, permissions, network zones, and log timestamps. A small detail can change the answer. At the same time, do not overthink details that do not affect the stated task. Your goal is steady, careful decision-making, not perfection on the first glance. The strongest PBQ strategy is to translate the scenario into a plain sentence before choosing the answer. You might say to yourself that the task is to stop unauthorized access to sensitive cloud data while keeping approved users working. That sentence points you toward access restriction, least privilege, encryption, and logging. You might say the task is to identify the first incident response action after suspicious activity is detected. That sentence points you toward verification, containment, or evidence preservation, depending on the details. You might say the task is to allow a web server to receive required traffic while blocking management access from the internet. That sentence points you toward a narrow firewall rule. This habit keeps the scenario from feeling like a wall of information. It turns the question into a decision with a goal. The main idea to carry forward is that PBQ success comes from methodical thinking, not panic or memorizing every possible screen. Find the task so you know what the question wants. Read the environment so your answer fits the setting. Identify the security goal so you choose a control that solves the right problem. In IAM questions, think about least privilege, accountability, authentication, and access review. In incident response questions, think about stage, evidence, containment, and recovery. In log questions, look for patterns in user, time, source, destination, action, and result. In cloud, firewall, and data protection questions, match the control to exposure, traffic, data state, and business need. For Security Plus SY0801, a PBQ is really a scenario decision. Slow down, read carefully, and let the objective guide the action.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.